being a fan of Inspector Morse and Lewis, you know, I didn't think I should come to Oxford, considering it was the sort of crime capital and murder capital of Britain, if not the world. And it's usually guest speakers who end up dead, so I didn't know if I should really attend, but trust me, I'm not going to be eating anything tonight afterwards, just in case you have rather horrible designs on me. Anyway, this is going to be rather informal. I just wanted to talk to you today about how I ended up in Pakistan, my experiences there, and then my reasons for leaving, and how I see the sort of future of Pakistan. My association with Pakistan actually goes back before I was born, if that's possible. My parents were hippies, and they travelled throughout northern India and across Pakistan and did the hippie trail through Afghanistan. They had Afghan coats, and they had, you know, this jeep that they travelled all the way through Iran and then back to Europe. And they became very good friends with some Pakistanis, who then ended up becoming my godparents. So I had a very strange christening where I had 3 Muslim godparents, Pakistani Muslim godparents, and then 3 Christian godparents. And so Pakistan was really in my blood from the get-go. And when I did my gap year, I went to Pakistan and stayed with my godparents there. And it wasn't too long before I actually eventually found my way to Pakistan with work. And I was working with the BBC, and I got to produce a program called Question Time in Pakistan, which was the same format as Question Time, if anyone knows that. And we did it in Pakistan. It was quite sort of revolutionary for Pakistan at that time, in 2002, to have politicians sitting together and actually discussing issues with a live studio audience. And it was there that I started to really slowly understand Pakistan. And I remember once we had a Question Time program with President Musharraf, and there was terrible sort of deference around Musharraf's President Sahib. And he had his microphone wire hanging outside his shirt, and I was in the control room, and I was saying to the floor manager, could somebody please tuck Musharraf Sahib's microphone wire, and it's looking messy. The floor manager didn't move. I said, please, could you tuck the... No, he didn't move. So eventually, I decided to leave the control room, run down the auditorium aisle, and was going to tuck in Musharraf's microphone wire myself, when suddenly Musharraf waved at me. And then I realized he wasn't waving at me, but he was stopping his guards, who were all in white shalwar kameez and black waistcoats, from getting out their guns and shoot me in the back, thinking I was some sort of lunatic arriving untoward into his auditorium. So that was when I realized, you know, this is not a normal country by any stretch. And it was also there that, you know, I started to understand the sort of idea of deference, and you know, and I was meeting, for example, the director of the show was this sort of gentleman who was had many years in PTV, but he did things a certain way, shall we say, and it wasn't necessarily the way that the BBC wanted to do it. And I was trying to sort of persuade him to change his style and how the shots should be for what the BBC wanted. And he didn't like it. He was very reluctant. And that's when I started to realize how important seniority was in Pakistan. You know, it was only in Pakistan where people talk about the senior players in the cricket team. And he was very, very, very keen, very early on, to establish that he was a senior director from PTV, and how, you know, obviously I was young then, so I had to be his junior, despite despite the fact that I was producing the program. So it was quite clear very early on that, you know, that the deference was certainly something that was very important in Pakistani society, and I couldn't ask him to do certain things because he was my senior. Anyway, after question time, at around the time of question time, I did a very stupid thing in Pakistan. I did something that, if any of you haven't done it yet, I would, you know, warn you about, is I fell in love. And, you know, of all the places in all the world to fall in love, I had to fall in love with Pakistan, and with a particular Pakistani. And that's what really got me to stay in Pakistan. And as a result, I decided to stay. And obviously, there weren't that many opportunities for somebody, an English-speaking British television producer in Pakistan. So after I left the BBC, I decided to join Geo, which was then an up-and-coming, thrusting Pakistani channel. They didn't really know what to do with me, so they decided they would put me on screen, and we would devise this program called OUPaksoc, which some of you may have seen, where I really had 3 months to try and become a Pakistani. I had 3 months to ascertain what it means to be a Pakistani. And it was quite an experience. I got to travel all over the country. I got to travel to places where you probably couldn't go now, to places like Dalaman and Kale, where I was with gun smugglers and learning how to build my own Kalashnikov. And I got to build the bullets as well, which was slightly disconcerting when I decided that I had to then fire it, because I didn't know whether they would actually emerge from the Kalashnikov or not. Thankfully they did, although there was a rather worrying moment where, upon arrival it was just off the Khyber Pass, our crew were turning around this hill, and we saw these tribesmen, and they then started firing at me. At which point I hit the ground thinking, oh my God, you know, this is the Taliban. Hit the ground, and I suddenly realized everyone was laughing, including the tribesmen. And it transpired that what they were doing was actually, you know, firing a gun in greeting at my arrival. And there I was, spread eagle on the floor, you know, thinking this was it. Anyway, I got to do lots of things. I, you know, milked buffalo, I cut sugarcane, I made gur, and at the same time, there was a serious point that we were trying to make with the program, which was, is there such a thing as a Pakistani identity? And this was actually where my doubts started emerging towards Pakistan, because initially one is thrilled to be in this rather exotic country, and you come across all these Goras who arrive, and they're all the smells and the spices, and everyone is so friendly and hospitable, and you know, oh my God, the colour of the buses, and everyone gets sort of caught up in the romantic sort of South Asian Orientalist view of Pakistan. But at the end of OUPaksoc, I became a Pakistani citizen. In the only way that male could, and still can, is through Safarish. The Prime Minister of the day, Shokar Aziz, decided that after the viewing public had voted overwhelmingly that I had sufficiently understood what it means to be a Pakistani, they decided to give me a Pakistani passport, which I still have. Well, actually, I don't. I lost it last week, but I became a Pakistani citizen. And but at the same time, having done this 3-month exercise of trying to understand what it means to be a Pakistani, I also saw the problems with Pakistan. It started to have doubts about whether Pakistan had a long-term future as a viable nation. Because what I saw throughout my travels was that Pakistan was a nation divided. A nation divided by ethnicity, a nation divided by class, a nation divided by language, a nation divided by creed, and even a nation divided by colour. I mean, the most prominent for me was ethnicity. I think the reason that I was so welcomed by so many was that I was this universal Pakistani. I wasn't Mahaja, I wasn't Punjabi, I wasn't Balochi, I wasn't Pathan, although I couldn't be Pathan. And I wasn't Sindhi. But it was very apparent early on that there was this great mistrust amongst my fellow Pakistanis towards each other. And I think that's best exemplified by Nawab Bukti, who, before he died, famously said, you know, I've been a Baloch for several centuries. I've been a Musliman for 1400 years. I've only been a Pakistani for 50 years. And that was very much where he categorized himself. You know, he was firstly a Baloch, secondly a Muslim, and thirdly, you know, way down a Pakistani. And that was the perception I got speaking to a lot of people. Perhaps with the exception of the Punjab, where there was more of a Pakistani nationalism than elsewhere. But still, you went around Pakistan and you saw the stereotypes. You know, the Punjabis loved their food, and the Pathans loved their men. But I should point out, ironically, after GKP, I did get 6 marriage proposals, of which 2 were from men, and they were fitting the stereotype. They were from Pathans. One of which wrote to me saying, George, I know this is against my religion, but I like your height and I like your weight. That was the hardest letter I had to write. One thing, you know, turning down a marriage proposal, but turning down a marriage proposal to a male Pathan was something I never thought I'd have to do. It's not you, it's me. The other problem also with George Ka Pakistan is people used to then sort of see me and they would get, you know, their reactions. You know, people would drive along, slam on the car brakes, and they'd go, "Bush!" And Kira and my wife, they would go, "So you're his special friend?" Yes. So it was very obvious that, you know, there was an ethnic divide, and you know, if we look at Pakistan, we've seen separatist movements in Sindh, we're seeing a real separatist movement at the moment in Balochistan. There have been separatist movements in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And I still feel that, you know, the ethnic divide is a problem, and a problem that won't go away unless we devolve power from the centre and from a Punjab-dominated centre. If you think about it, where does power in Pakistan lie? It primarily lies with the strongest institution, which is the army. And 70% of all the army, both the officer class and from the soldiers, are drawn from only 5 villages, of which 3 are in Punjab and 2 are in what I call sort of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Punjab, you know, on that border. So, you know, where, you know, the most powerful institution is drawn from a very, very small pool. And I think that is helping create distrust and division within the country. At the same time, this is the only institution that is actually holding the country together, I think. So there was an obvious ethnic divide in Pakistan. I then saw very much at first hand the class divide that was in Pakistan. There was, I lived in defence, in Karachi, which is the sort of posh elite area for those who don't know. And I remember when we did GKP, I'd have friends come up to me and say, "You were in Sada yesterday." Actually, I wasn't. "No, but on television you were in Sada." "Okay, yes, I was on." He said, "Why were you walking alone in Sada?" And I was like, "Well, it's, historical town centre of Karachi." And he said, "That's very brave." You wouldn't go there. And I was thinking, this is your centre. This is the centre of your city. And it was very much obvious from the get-go. We, i.e. we, the English-speaking elite, lived in our bubbles, very much cut off from the rest of society. And the elite is disengaged in other ways. We don't pay our taxes. The federal FBR estimates the total revenue loss to tax evasion is about 1.27 trillion. That's 70% of corporation tax. For every 100 rupees collected by the tax inspectors, 79 rupees is lost due to tax evasion. And the percentage of tax on GDP is amongst the lowest in the world. And this is a real problem for Pakistan, because on the one hand, I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently after the attack on and killing of Osama bin Laden about the fact that our sovereignty has been impinged. Well, how many of those people who are claiming, who are puffing out their chests, the Garlic Brigade, and saying our sovereignty is being impinged, pay their taxes? If you want your own sovereignty, we need to pay our taxes, and this is very much, the class, and certainly the rich elite need to be paying their taxes, and they're failing to do so at the moment. I think we have 2.2 million registered taxpayers out of a population of 180 million, and of that 2.2, only 1.2 million actually pay tax. So that's 11% of our GDP is taxed, compared to 28% in the US and 48% in the UK. And even our federal elite, our feudal elite, and their farms are completely tax-free. They don't pay any tax on it. So there was very much an obvious class divide. And I think also, my impression of the liberal elite is that I think it's a misnomer. They claim to be liberal. They want free speech. They want rule of law. But they don't want the democratic mechanisms that will ensure them. They espouse liberalism, but they don't want the egalitarian values that underpin them. Distribution of wealth, distribution of power. So we have this closeted elite who are building walls higher and higher and living in nice big houses and creating this bubble around them. And they are certainly, in my opinion, very much part of the problem. And it's not only the sort of English-speaking liberal elite that are the problem, the intellectual elite. Where are they? After 71, after the failure of a two-state solution, after the failure of the idea of Pakistan emerged after 71, where there was a vacuum, there was an ideological vacuum created. What did Pakistan stand for after that? And that vacuum, unfortunately, has been filled by people, by outside nations with their own vested interests, whether it be Saudi Arabia, whether it be the US, or internally with, the al-Haq and Islamization. The intellectual elite has failed, in my opinion, to really come up with an alternative idea of Pakistan post-71. Now, obviously, all wrapped up in the class divide is the fact that Pakistan is divided on linguistic barriers. There's been this language divide that is a huge problem. There's a sort of linguistic Berlin Wall, if you like, in Pakistan. You can't unite the country on Urdu. Only 8% of the population, in the last credible census, considered Urdu their mother tongue. And it's very apparent that there is the English-speaking elite and everybody else. And that's a real bar for people for any kind of social mobility internally within Pakistan. I remember there was I don't know if anyone saw this, about a year or two back, there was a YouTube clip going around on Facebook and things with Mira speaking English. And, well, I mean, everyone laughs at Mira, but this is a girl who's come from a lower middle class. She's trying to provide for her family, and she is providing. Now, we can question whether what she's doing is any good, but there's a real sneering attitude towards people like Mira because they don't speak English well. And yet, a lot of people in this room probably don't know their alif from their elbow, and a lot of people, certainly amongst the English elite, don't really know their own language, Urdu, that sort of language divide is very unhealthy, I think. Obviously, there's a religious divide, and that has been there from day one, and has only got worse, in my opinion. I mean, I think the sectarian divide in Pakistan is very worrying, and I mean, I've had this firsthand. My wife's family are Shia, and there are a lot of Shia doctors of my wife's family who've been killed. And in the last few years, whether you're Ahmadi, whether you're Shia, whether you're Christian, and even now, the Barelvis have been attacked in Abdullah Shah Ghazi and these sort of shrines. This is a significant problem that Pakistan is facing, and it only seems to be getting worse. There's obviously a colour divide. I spent time with the Maktanis. They used to say to me, well, George, would you have been accepted in Pakistan had you been not white? Because we still have these colonial hang-ups. And you see that all around, with Fair and Lovely being the most popular beauty cream in Pakistan. Shadi Online, did anyone watch that, Shadi Online? Everyone wanted Gauri Laki. And what was that song by Junaid Jamshed? Gauri Rang.
He also had a song on the Savli Salon.
Yeah, that was his second album though. That was Junaid. But so as I came to the end of George Pakistan, it was very apparent that this was a country that really only came together at times of war or cricket against India. But in the early noughties, in 2004, there was still a sense of optimism. There was still a sense of things could improve. And so Kieran and I then embarked on a program called Kieran or George, which was a morning show, and it was fun, yet it was also dealing with social issues. We talked about sex, we talked about cousin marriages, we talked about child sexual abuse. At the same time, we had Melina Khan on, and we had Junaid and shit. We didn't have Junaid and he refused to come on because Kieran was on the sofa and he didn't want to have Kieran on the sofa with him. But we had celebrity interviews, we had your usual morning show fare, and we were very much the Richard and Judy of Pakistan television. And in fact, I was actually very much like Richard. I was the embarrassing husband to the more sensible Kieran. We had this one time when we had these Pakistani students on the show, and they had just come up with some potential cure for MRSA, the hospital superbug, using silver nanotechnology. And I was like, yeah, मैं बहुत proud हूँ, and they were only 16, 17-year-old kids. And I said which was, I'm very proud. And I said to Kieran, Urdu mein proud kya matlab? And she went, Fakhir. Obviously my Urdu was pretty rudimentary there. So I said, मैं बहुत फक्र हूँ, After which, and then there were other things I couldn't say on live television, after that. Kieran banned me from talking, using the number 14 in Urdu. She banned me from saying holiday in Urdu. And she even banned me from using my sister's name. Talking about my sister, and my sister's name is Laura. So there were problems with doing a live television show, but it was a wonderful experience. We felt we were doing work that was important. We were discussing cousin marriages. We were discussing a lot of social issues. At the same time, we were hopefully interesting people, and we had some. We were the second most popular morning show after Nadia Khan at the time. But slowly, we became disillusioned. Pakistan was becoming increasingly unstable, and more often than not, our show suddenly found itself being pulled off the air for breaking news, for bomb attacks, and a program that was about hope, a program that was optimistic, a program that was fun, was difficult to do in such a climate. And after the Marriott and the Mumbai attacks, which had happened within the space of a month of each other, I got a phone call from my father, who, in that sort of typically sort of British understated way, said, "We're getting a little bit twitchy about you appearing on television in Pakistan, and live television at that." And at that stage I realised that it was probably in my interest, and probably and also for my parents' interest, that I decided to pull the plug on Kieran or George and learn my profile. But there were other things that were going on at the time that was very disturbing to me about Pakistan. It was certainly within the media. The rise of anti-intellectualism was becoming very prominent, and these sort of demagogues on the Pakistani media, like Zed Hamid and Emid Qureshi and people like this, and you saw that all over, and I remember walking into Liberty Bookstore, and there was a comment card that was being placed in the comment